streets, all she can see are the dreams all made solid, are the dreams made real. All of the buildings, all of the cars were once just a dream in somebody's head.
Good morning. So, dreams made solid and dreams made real. What is the connection with software development? Well, we're going to find out in about 30 minutes. And things that were once a dream in somebody's head. Then again, why are we talking about this? Well, for one thing, because it's real. It's just what it is. The chairs you're sitting on right now were once just a dream in somebody's head. Probably not the entire chair, but one little tiny bit of dream over the other created a chair that you are sitting on right now. So, what is a dream? At least in this context. What do I mean by dream? A dream to me is something that moves people. A dream is something that it has a certain quality. For example, it is fluid, it is liquid. It's something that can change over time, can adapt. At the same time, it pushes you to do things. It pushes you to move into action and do something. And for example, dreaming is not fantasizing. I can lay on a couch and fantasize for hours, for days, for weeks, without ever feeling the urge to do anything. I could get lost in my fantasies, which is very pleasant, but that's not what I mean by dreaming in this context. And dreaming is not planning either. Planning is very much connected to reality, is connected to making sure that things work, putting one little step after the other. And so it is not as fluid, as liquid as a dream is. And I think the connection between what we do and this ability to dream, and the reason is that there is evidence that more and more often we tend to plan for the short term. Our visibility in the future, especially in management sometimes, is kind of short-sighted. It's more focused on the immediate results, which is an effect, of course, of trying to plan and so on and so on. There is evidence about this, evidence that companies, for example, do not innovate a lot because they focus on the short-term results. My point is that in our post-industrial culture and post-industrial mindset, we need to get back to this ability of dreaming. What we have learned from post-industrialism is the ability to plan, the ability to make sure things work right. But what we may get back is our ability for dreaming, ability to dream. And for sure, our projects would benefit from that. So I came across this organizational model. All models are wrong, as they say, and some are useful, okay? So this is just a model. It's just one way of representing arbitrarily a portion of reality. So it's just a simple model. But I found it very useful for what I do as a consultant and coach and trainer to understand how software organizations work or don't work sometimes. So in this model, we have three key elements, which are dream, order, and action. We intentionally use vague terms here because these vague terms can be mapped to something that is more specific to each individual in this room. But in general, by dream, we mean the intent, the vision, the mission in, let's say, in business terms. Order is whatever you need to turn that dream into something concrete. You need a structure. So in an organization, the order, for example, is the separation of functions, roles, responsibilities, processes, for example, or procedures, everything that gives structure to what you do. You don't want a too rigid structure, but you need some structure. And this structure helps you to move into action. And action is the production part of what we do. Is where, for example, our technical skills are. In software development, the action is developing software. Okay? Quite simply. So we have these three elements which we can map a little better to what we do, and they are connected to each other. This model has a counterpart, which is when instead of dreaming and using order to put your dream into action so that the action can create a new dream, you go the other way around. You don't start from a dream, you start from a need. A dream is something that comes from the inside. A need is something that comes from the outside. I need to do this because there is something from the outside telling me to do things. And so when you have a need, frequently you react. And the reaction sometimes is disorder. So, like for example, we need to immediately fix a critical bug that showed up. Okay, we react. And sometimes this reaction is not as ordered as it could be. Just to give you a little more information about this model, let me give you an example. Let's take, for example, a very energetic startup company. Let's say 3-4 people, 3-4 friends working together. They like each other. They have a very strong dream together, and they're also very skilled people. Okay. In that specific context, the dream component is very active. There's a lot of energy in the dream part, and the action element is also very, very energetic. That's the reason why, for example, in a startup, you work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's what you do in a startup. Okay, but that's not sustainable, right? So you can do it for a while, not for long. In that context, there is very little order. A startup is by definition chaotic, and that's okay. I mean, the lack of order is compensated by the strong dream and a strong action. The opposite, sometimes, is something like this. A large, bureaucratic, highly structured company where we have completely lost the dream. There is a lot of focus on processes, on procedures, on writing reports, going to meetings, and so on and so on and so on, and very little action. Okay. So you see, it's an interesting way of mapping the nature of an organization. It's a system which has some dialectics, some intrinsic dialectics. Now, focusing a little bit more on what we do, meaning the people in this room do, and talking about Agile or Lean software development, the same model can be applied to artifacts and roles and also on ceremonies, things that we do basically in our daily job. Like for example, the dream, the inception part of our work is what is usually represented in a product backlog, assuming you have one. I hope we do have one. But if you do have a product backlog, that's basically the representation of your dream. That's what you would like to see becoming true. Okay? And roles, ceremonies belong to the planning part. If you do Scrum, for example, there are some roles which are mandatory, like the PO and the Scrum Master. If you are in a more lean Kanban environment, there are no mandatory roles, but there are de facto roles. Okay? So that's the order part of what we do. And as I mentioned, the production part is what is usually represented on your Kanban board or task board, is what we put into the iteration backlog. Because that belongs to production, it's a different domain. Everything that goes on that board is something we are turning from a dream into a concrete reality. It's production. If you look at in even more detail at the backlog, that's an interesting artifact for me. Usually when I go into a new company and they ask me to teach them some Agile practice, usually they are confused about what is exactly a product backlog and what is a user story. Sometimes they ask me, well, so a user story is more or less like a use case, right? Well, no, not really. No, different thing. Okay. A use case is very detailed. It's something that the production part of your organization will use to know what to do. There is no dreaming in a use case, right? A user story, on the other hand, as the name implies, is the narration of something that we would like to see becoming true. And just to be able to manage these stories better, we keep user stories small. I mean, the amount of text that you can put on a user story is limited. You don't want a 50 pages long user story, I assume. Okay? So since we give that constraint that the story should be reasonably small, it means that it can only be either very wide in scope, but very poor in detail. Like, my dream is I want to create the next Facebook. That's my dream. Very wide in scope, very little detail. Okay? Or it could be the opposite. My dream is I want to be able to accept a credit card payment. Okay? Very narrow in scope, and you provide a lot of details. It's still a dream. It's actually what I call a dream bit. A user story is a little bit of your larger dream. Okay? It still belongs to that domain. It is not connected to reality up to this point, meaning production. In your backlog, probably you also have needs. There are things that you need to do, and they are planned. You want to remember to do them, and so you put them in your backlog, like, for example, fixing bugs, or migrating to a new version of a library which is no longer supported. Whatever. Things that you have to do because the world is telling you you need to do this. Okay? So it's interesting sometimes to analyze a backlog and just assess the dream bits to needs ratio in the backlog. Because these two forces, the forces that pushes you to do something and act, which is the dream, and the other force, the opposite way, the need that forces you to react, are constantly conflicting in what we do. And finding a good balance, it's an interesting job, it's an interesting activity. Basically, the idea is there enough dream in my backlog to be successful? That's the question that you want to ask yourself. At some point, what you have in the backlog, your stories, your dream bits, will reach a level of detail which is sufficient to turn them into actions, into action items. So, for example, I do make a distinction when I talk about the backlog between stories and themes and epics, as we tend to do in Scrum. I find it very confusing, and usually the people, when I explain this to newcomers to the Agile world, they get confused about what's an epic, what's a theme. But to me, there is another difference which is very important. Is this dream bit actionable or is it not? Is it actionable or not? Is it something that can be turned into reality? So I have this thing which I call the actionability threshold. And when a dream bit crosses the actionability threshold, well, we may decide, using our ceremonies, to put it into production. So it goes into your iteration backlog. Okay? And we start working on them. The team will start cranking out pieces of reality starting from your dream bits. So your dream bits become solid, as in the Peter Gabriel song at the beginning, dreams made solid. The next part is to make sure that your dream is also real. It is exactly what you wanted, or at least it's reasonably similar to what you wanted, which is why we have acceptance tests. To me, an acceptance test, the question behind an acceptance test is, has my dream become true? That's the question behind an acceptance test. Of course, there are technicalities in acceptance test. But the point is, I had an idea, I had an intent, I had a vision, and a little piece of this vision has turned into something that I can use. Is that what I wanted? Has my dream become real? My dream bit, at least. And that's for me the meaning of acceptance tests. If we put all this together, you see that model, dream, order, and action maps quite well to an iterative approach to software development, because we work with intangible, as Jade was saying, we work with ephemeral things. What we do is intangible. So it's easier for us to turn dreams into reality, because we don't have the constraints of the physical world. So it's a very nice model, thinking that I have dream bits, that I have a backlog which represents my dream, and I have dream bits that through order, they turn into action items, they go into production, they become solid, they become real, and then they feed the dream again. And because the dream is fluid, so the feedback that you get decides what the dream will be in the future. Very interesting model. It also applies to Kanban. So, I mean, there is not, if you want to apply this model, dream, order, action, there is not really much difference between doing an iterative approach like Scrum or doing Kanban. Just a word of warning for you. If you're doing Kanban, you pay a lot of attention to maximizing the throughput in your workflow, because that's the reason why we have lean and lean manufacturing. We want to optimize the throughput of our workflow. So my warning is, please just remember that what is flowing through your workflow is still dream bits. Don't get lost in the post-industrial mindset of just planning and thinking about reality and concrete things. Inject dream into what you do. Inject dreams into the product or the project that you're working on. So don't, just my word of advice is just keep an eye on your dream bits, even if you're doing Kanban, which is perfectly fine. So basically what I'm trying to say is that I think it would be extremely useful for what we do, IT people, to connect back to this capacity of envisioning something and transforming that vision into reality. I'd like to spend the last few minutes of my talk talking about this, talking about envisioning and transforming dreams into reality. I've been considering different ways of talking about this, and different approaches, different techniques, different authors as well. But eventually I decided to go with Disney, okay? The gentleman here. But just let me tell you a couple of things. The Walt Disney Company is the largest media conglomerate on the planet. It totaled about $5,000 billion net profit last year. Okay. They have 160,000 employees, and they do everything from movies, cable TV, websites, and so on and so on and so on. So the reason why I'm saying this is because I want to be sure that you don't think we're going to talk about Bambi. Bambi is great. Bambi is fine, okay? But I want to talk about the envisioning capacity of a man who was able to create this thing, okay? So Walt Disney created his own creative process. It's the way that his teams worked when they were creating whatever they were creating. And it goes like this. Disney used 3 different rooms arranged in 3 different ways. The first room was the creative room. The creative room is the room where ideas were spun, where dreams were dreamt. Correct. Yeah. Okay. In the creative room, everything is possible. And the arrangement of the creative room is that the idea is put in the center of the room, could be a table where you brainstorm and you draw there or whatever, and people are sitting in a circle around the idea. The second room is called the realist room. And it's where the idea faces reality. Is this doable? How can we do this? Okay. And the arrangement of this room is also different. The idea is in front and people are sitting in a semicircle. And then we have a third room, where ideas go to after being in the realist room, which is the critic room. In the critic room, people are sitting in a row with the idea in front, and they question the idea. So ideas would go through these phases in cycles until they were either rejected or transformed into something that became reality. These three rooms represent different capacities that each of us have. So it's a matter of aligning people, aligning the team on the same, let's say, brainwave frequency. Aligning the team, for example, on the dreamer capacity. In the dreamer capacity, the main theme is I want to. I want to create this, I want to do that, and there are no limits. So all things are possible. It's a matter of vision. You're thinking about the future, usually the long-term future. Then if you activate the other faculty, which is your realist mindset, the question is different. How can I do this? Okay, how to? Not want to, but how to. And so you try to sort things out. You are thinking in the short-term period. Usually you think about the present. And it's a matter of transforming this dream into action. The critic room is also different. The main question is chance to. Is there a chance that blah, blah, blah? And in that case, you try to make sure that everything fits well together. It's a matter of logic. It's a matter of remembering the past mistakes, past problems, or observing the future. What could happen if this goes wrong, and so on, and so on, and so on. Okay? But the key point is that this is a process. It's a structured, collective process that guides a group of people through a walkthrough of different intellectual activities. So what I'm trying to say is there are practical things that you can do to keep your dreams alive, to learn to dream together and give a shape, a clear definition of your dream. This is one approach, but there are of course many others. I was thinking of the six thinking hats of the Bono, but there are many approaches. But Disney I liked. So there's one more thing I'd like to say. Even if you have the dream, but you work in a large organization, at some point you will face the problem of sharing the dream throughout the organization. Okay? Sharing the dream. Because you need people to be part of your dream. You want them to feel part of the dream. Now, the thing is, there are people who are able to transfer their dream just for what they are. Of course, they say things, they do things, but they transfer their dream just for what they are. Even in companies, okay? I have had the pleasure of meeting people who were inspirational just for what they were, or they still are. But some other times, we need to learn how to do that. We need to learn how to align people or to bring them aboard on the dream, or even better, to create the dream together. So I'm going back for a second to the model I presented at the beginning, and I'd like to make a connection with things we say about organizations. In an organization, there are different leadership levels, we say. At the meta level, you are concerned mostly about vision. At the macro level, you are concerned most about strategy. And at the micro level, you are concerned mostly about the environment. These three things, they map quite nicely, in my opinion, to what we do in software development. For example, if you do Scrum, but even if you practice something similar which is not Scrum, there are moments, there are cycles in which you try to understand which will be the strategy of your product, for example, for the next year. Or maybe you decide which is going to be the next release in the next 3 months. Or then you plan for the next iteration. So these meta, macro, and micro levels, they map to strategy planning, release planning, and iteration planning in what we do. Now, the thing is, how do you keep them aligned? How you make sure that people, the different levels of the organizations, are aligned to the same dream? A concept which is part of this model is that you introduce a new role, which is the dream keeper. The dream keeper is a person that is responsible for making sure that the dream is present at all levels in your organization. So, for example, this person attends all the different planning meetings and so on, but his focus is on vision, mission. Is it what we're doing in this iteration consistent with our dream? Is this what we really wanted on the long term or middle term? Okay. It's a role, just another role, which, in my opinion, could be an alternative to the sometimes broken role of the product owner. Okay? What you want is someone who aligns people to a shared goal. Okay? Sometimes one person is not enough, so you can create a guild of dream keepers. Okay. The term guild is now very popular. Eric Niebuhr is using it, Jürgen Appelo is using it, so why not me? Okay. So a guild, a bunch of people, maybe they do different things and they have other roles as well, but they have something in common. They talk about the dream at different levels and they make sure that at each level the dream is present. So just a possibility, just a thought. But I know at least one company who has a dream keeper in the company, for example. So time is almost past, and I'd like to wrap it up very, very quickly for you. Basically, I've said three things. I've said that for what we do, if we don't want to get lost in our post-industrial mindset and just think about the short term, we want to get back to our envisioning and dreaming capacity, which is an essential and energizing element of each team and organization. I also suggested that the concept of dreaming is very consistent with what we do in software development, especially if you use an iterative approach. So I explained that order and action and dream, they map to things that we are already doing. So why not pay more attention to the dreaming part? And I also suggested that a dream in an organization or team is stronger when it is shared and when there is alignment to that specific dream. I think I have still time to even suggest three practical things that you might want to try at home, meaning at work. But I will also run an open space on this later during these 2 days. Okay? So one thing you might want to try to do is to do a retrospective together, inspect your backlog, and try to assess the dream bit to need ratio in your backlog. Just think about it. I mean, is this what we wanted? I mean, is there any surprise? Maybe we could find out that 90% of your backlog is needs, things that you have to do, and there is very little dream. So if you find that out, well, think about it. Maybe you can do something different. The second thing I'd like to suggest is if you are a leader, not a manager, a leader, someone who gives direction to people, okay, that sets a direction for people. Is the dream clear to you and to the entire team? What are you doing to share this dream with the team? And the third thing is, if you work in a software development team, project, company, and you use Agile or Lean, is there someone in your organization who people tend to listen to more attentively? Someone that naturally inspires people? Because if you have such a person, well, maybe you can ask for this person, ask this person to help to share the dream with the rest of the organization. So maybe this person is a candidate to be your dream keeper. So these are the three things you could try to do. And I suspect I am done with the time. I'm perfectly on time. I'd just like to say that, of course, these are my contact information. This was the first time I gave this specific talk, so I would very much appreciate your feedback. Even if you can stop me by during these 2 days and tell me what you liked and what I could improve. Don't tell me what you didn't like. Okay, what I could improve and what you liked. Okay, and the slides are already on SlideShare. If you're interested, you can find me on LinkedIn, Twitter, and I'd like to finish with words from the song at the beginning. Finish as we started, because I think that the best dreams are the ones that benefit you and the others. So may your best dreams become solid, and may your best dreams become real. Thank you.
Thank you.